The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the broadcast. My name is Marty Schenkman, and we have a really great program, very, very practical program for you today. We all are struggling and working remotely while this webinar is going on. If you're watching this webinar when you're back working in your office, everything in this webinar is still going to be relevant because the world has changed and we're going to continue to work more remotely than ever before. We have some really incredible people on the call. Baron Henley is not only a brilliant IT consultant, but he speaks English, which is so rare in his field. And you will absolutely enjoy his practical, intelligent advice and guidance. And I will even tell you, as a plug for Baron and his group Affinity, I consult every quarter with Baron for an hour just to pick his vast brain for new tech ideas. Mary Vanderneck is not only a brilliant attorney and a really nice lady, but she is probably the most tech-savvy attorney that I've ever met anywhere. And Jonathan Blotmacher is not only the best-known estate planning attorney anywhere, but Jonathan has been very active in the tech world. He founded Interactive Legal, which we're going to mention as one of our sponsors in a minute. But Jonathan, in I think it was 2010 or 11, gave a lecture on the law office of the future at Heckerling. And I went back to my office, drank the Kool-Aid, and began to go paperless, cloud-based, and everything I could do, starting right after hearing his lecture. So my current practice is due to Jonathan. So we have two sponsors today. I'm going to mention the first, Interactive Legal, and it's totally appropriate to the topic today, provides legal drafting software for estate planning attorneys. It's not just merely forms, but there's planning guidance, there's training videos, there's FAQs and all sorts of guidance as you go through the documents. And they draft memos and letters and checklists and matrimonial and other information as well. But it's really a state-of-the-art estate planning document generation software. If you have not adopted document generation software in your practice, you have to look into it. I don't know how people can really function efficiently in this age without document generation software. There's another webinar recorded on both Interactive Site and mine where Jonathan and I talked about drafting documents, SLAT, STAPS, SPATs, and other acronyms in the current environment. We actually show you how to use document generation software to efficiently draft documents. Their contact data is there. Jonathan, you want to say a quick word for Peak?
Thank you, Marty. Yes, the Alaska Trust Company, which is now morphed into Peak Trust Company, was begun after Alaska adopted in 1997 the Alaska Trust Act, based upon laws that I had written to allow individuals to create self-settled trusts, today often called domestic asset protection trusts, in Alaska. It was a radical idea, but now we have 19 jurisdictions in the United States that do that. I've referred over 200 clients to Peak Trust, and I've never had one leave them. They are extremely efficient in my judgment. They're very low cost. They're very, very flexible. And in fact, my family uses them exclusively. And that's not just because my brother and nephew run the company and I happen to be the director of estate planning there, but they have a cadre of great people. So if you're going to go to a domestic asset protection trust jurisdiction, I'd suggest you consider Peak. Thank you, Marty.
Marty, we can't hear you if you're talking.
So it's been my custom over the past approximately year to mention a charity on every webinar and try to help inform the audience of some great charitable opportunities that you yourselves may want to support or that you may suggest to clients in the appropriate circumstances. And over the past year, we've done everything from Boys Town, the American Cancer Society, the American Brain Foundation, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, veterans organizations, and more. The charity that we've been suggesting this month is the American Brain Foundation. I sit on their national board. It's an incredible organization. one of the unique things about the American Brain Foundation is they are, instead of just attacking a specific brain disease like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or MS, their goal or mission is to try to cure one, cure all, because they believe that there is so many interconnectedness in the sense of brain disease that if they can find a cure for one disease, it may lead to the cure for many different brain diseases. They have a very close working relationship with the American Academy of Neurology, which is really the preeminent institution in the world for neurologists, and they help direct much of their brain research. It's a wonderful brain research organization. I'm going to turn it over to Baron, and basically what we're going to do until Baron has to check out is he's going to run the show and lead the charge on the program. I'm going to advance the slides when he says so, and at some points, Mary, Jonathan, or I may interject some comments. Baron, it's all yours. Take it away.
Okay, and I'll just say next for the next slide. Next. So, you know, there was a time when it was kind of a luxury to be able to work from wherever. You know, lawyers would call us, you know, let's say from Minnesota and say, I'd like to work from my house in Florida 4 months out of the year. And that was really, it would be fun if I could do that. It's obviously no longer the case. This is required. So next. So we call it, you know, practice portability. And it's really the ability to run your practice, communicate efficiently, take care of clients from anywhere, so long as you have, hopefully, an internet connection. Next. So the idea of an untethered practice just means I'm not tied to the office to get all my case information and communicate and represent clients and take care of them. And frankly, you know, I'm of the generation where, you know, all the jobs I ever held, we all got together in an office, and that was my frame of reference. But that's really not required anymore. And I wouldn't have believed it, honestly, when we started this company 23 years ago. But today we have 51 employees in 13 states. If you have the infrastructure to support it, absolutely, you can do this. And we'll talk about, this is all about recommendations to make this all work, and this, so that any law firm and any law office can work efficiently even when you're all separated geographically.
And the focus, everyone, of this program, we're not going to tell you how to make your office paperless, so there'll be some discussion of that. The real focus is practical information you can use to deal with remote work now. So if you're not fully up to speed, either in the comments Baron makes or the incredible slides he has, you're going to find out what you need to do to really help yourself get there. Baron?
So the technological advances have enabled this, and the potential of some other kind of a disaster. I mean, we've got weather events that are getting more severe. You know, in 2016, we had 5 1,000-year floods in 1 year. Those cause not just displacement because of their original occurrence, but they cause power outages that make us leave our offices. They might take down the internet, which cause us to leave our office. All of those things make go ahead and keep tapping. This kind of remote capability is now simply required. It was a want, now it's a need, and we can't possibly allow ourselves to be encumbered by this again. We got to expect this might happen again. So if it happens and we didn't do anything to prepare, then we only can look in the mirror about that.
And Baron, when you were saying that, one of the things is kind of the importance of the internet. And one of the things that we've run into in trying to shift to a remote office is that we have lawyers and staff who live in rural areas and don't have any internet access. So what do you do then?
The only alternative in that case is to get, like, we pay for unlimited data plans for the cell phones for a great number of our employees as kind of an employee benefit, and sometimes that's the only alternative. And you know, if you're in a rural area, you might have cell phone coverage, but you don't have any other internet coverage, and that's frankly you know, if I have 3 or 4 bars on my cell phone, that's all I need. And as 5G starts to spread out, you know, then I think that's when we'll really have complete coverage across the United States for internet access, provided, you know, I've been reading that people are catching those towers on fire, something to do with COVID-19. But that's in the future. I would expect that to go away entirely. But today, I really think you can get satellite, but it's from what I've heard, it is not as fast and it's a little bulky. So there's some satellite options for internet access, but cell phone would probably be a better option if you've got bars wherever you are.
And the cell phones, what our guys have been relying on, and then we're sort of and here we don't have a complete stay-in-place order, but directed health measures that are approximately equivalent, but we send 3 to 5 people in a day, and the people who have no access are kind of the ones that we let go in, but to the extent they're out, the cell coverage has been primarily what we've been using.
Yeah.
So let me give you just a couple of comments, folks that are working from home and perhaps for the first time what I have. So I have the highest, fastest, greatest, most expensive internet connectivity that I can get. I'm in a fairly built up area in Danbury, Connecticut, so I don't have any problem with internet. I've always been a Boy Scout. I like Plan B, Plan C. I can tether to my cell phone just as Baron described. Just watch the amount of data usage, because once you get over what's allotted, it gets costly, or they, I forgot the term for it, but they kind of throttle you down, which makes it less functional. And Plan C is I also bought and carry with me a hotspot, so I have that. And I have both a Verizon and AT&T phone, so I have 2 different carriers so I can grab whichever is best. And those are only really backups if I'm traveling on the road. While I'm working in place now with the COVID restrictions, I have pretty functional internet at home. But if there's ever an outage or an issue, I have backup. And I can tell you, just apropos to what Baron said, the reason that I started carrying 2 cell phones and a hotspot is during Hurricane Sandy, my office in New York was down for 2 solid weeks, and what I did is I ran my office from my laptop using what I just described. So if you need to address what you're working on now from home during COVID, you can get a cell phone, you can order a hotspot online, you can probably improve your internet access unless you're in a rural area like Mary said. Very quickly, what I do for an untethered practice, I have a fairly complete office at my home in terms of a high-speed printer so that I can print if I need to. I still print bills. I know Mary is totally paperless. I print things that for clients and some vendors that have to be in paper. So I have a printer for that and a scanner so I can get everything back to electronic format. We basically are paperless other than the couple of one-offs like I just mentioned. And that's really it. I know, Mary, you handle things a little differently. You want to comment?
I do, and we talked a little bit before, and we both are kind of like our redundant system. So I'm actually in the city. I'm not one of our rural people, and I have our business premium internet. But despite having the highest level of home internet possible, there's been so much demand on it that I have not always had access via my regular internet. So like you, I have different devices, which Baron a couple of times has given me grief about over the years that I have so many devices, but I have one device that has Verizon and another that has Sprint, so that I have, and then I have our local Cox internet service in hopes that some way or the other I can continue to be able to function. I do have, like, a separate office in my home. I think we talked about doing that. That works for me. I like having, I'm a little in the Baron camp, I like 2 to 3 screens, so I actually set up 3 screens. If I do move into another area of the house, I might use like an iPad or a laptop to create a double screen. I think Baron has a portable type screen that he's going to share about as well. I don't actually have a scanner. I do have a printer that if I really got desperate, I could scan on, and that is just because I am very paperless, and I have not, since I've been working remotely, which is several weeks at this point, found a need to have it, to get one of the scanners. But then, I've been working on paperless since 2005. But for most people, having a scanner or a way to scan documents is going to be a helpful and useful tool. I do have a printer. I can tell you that I actually so far have not had to use the printer to print anything. So we've been really avid about trying to find different ways to do all of our documents electronically.
So
Yeah, and as it relates
Mary,
to
this is
go ahead.
Mary, this is Jonathan. Since I've been home, I'm trustee of a number of trusts. I've had to sign documents. And I've also had to, for some of the investment people that I hire as trustee, they want a copy of my driver's license. So, number one, if I've got to sign something, I need to print it out and then I scan it back, or, you know, I make a photocopy from the same machine that I happen to have of my driver's license, and then I can scan that off as well. What do you do when you need to sign something in person?
So far, we've been able to do pretty much everything not in person. So with the trust, like if you look at the law here, it doesn't actually require a notary. But what we've done is we still have, since again, we don't have a stay in place order. So we have one person, and well, I'll tell you the two different things I've done. So one, we've done those by video conference to the extent that that's permissible and we don't need to have an in-person presence. And we did, like here, we are one of the states who has advanced the Electronic Notary Act. So most of the documents we can sign by an electronic notary. But we have created in our office for the couple things that have to be signed, kind of a safe place where we have everybody has to wear masks that come in, and we created a setup where somebody can come in. Our reception area has been converted. You come in, sit down with a mask. We have a plexiglass service thing, and then they can come in and sign that. We also have one person who has done drive-by signings. But we've done a lot of signings where we coach people through on the other end. So for example, we had to sign some life insurance forms that we were processing as part of an estate. And we just coached the client through how to do that in their PDF software and had them create an electronic signature, save it, fix it to the document, save the document, and send it to us.
let me interrupt because we want to keep moving. I think a key take-home point is everybody's got to be able to work outside of their office. This is not going to end in a month, even if everybody goes back to whatever the new normal is. This is functionality we all need. And I think a key take-home point is Mary and I described, and Jonathan, very different approaches to this. Find the approach that works for you. And if you need help, you consult with somebody, an IT consultant, to help you get there, but don't use whatever the out-of-the-box standard approach is. Figure out what works for your comfort level. And again, all three of us, and that's why I wanted us all on the call, on the webinar, we all have different approaches. Baron, back to you.
Okay, and just a couple of comments on the internet access. You should call your internet service provider, your home internet service provider, each year and ask them if they've got faster service for the same or better deal. They constantly improve things and don't tell you, and they lower the prices sometimes and don't tell you. So just as an illustration, in 2019, I called Horrible Spectrum, which has a monopoly where I live, and so I don't have any other choices. I was paying for 120 down. And I called him up and I said, I don't think I'm getting 120 down. And she goes, oh, well, now you can get 400. You want to investigate that? And I said, sure, what does that cost? And she typed on her computer for a minute and said, oh, it'll reduce your bill by $7.32 a month. So I went from 120 to 400 and I'm paying less. I would never have, of course, known that if I hadn't called them. So I would just put a recurring appointment on your calendar and just call them up and make sure they don't have some better deal that might even cost less money. And that's the internet access stuff. The mobile hardware, you got to obviously be able to take your electronic file with you. And you know, this is another one of those things where a lot of times in the law office, they only buy desktops for support staff, and maybe the lawyers might have laptops. But if I'm going to send everybody home and they're going to be working from home and downloading and working with confidential client data, I don't have any idea what kind of computer they're using if they're using home computers to access that information. It could be Windows 7. It could not have any security updates. It could have no antivirus. If I buy laptops for my employees and I say, these are the computers you're going to take home and access client data from, I have a lot more control over that. I can lock those down. I can encrypt the drives. I can make sure all the things are loaded. So I think that's one of the new normals is going to be, there's going to be a lot more laptops. They already outsell desktops. But even for people who traditionally didn't get those, I think they're going to get them now.
You know, we've had, Baron, that's been our policy for a while, and I think you helped us facilitate that. But we are, you know, we had the 500-year floods here last year, so we had a lot of people who had to having those laptops that we set up and that we have some control over. So we actually had some that you could check. We have some you could check out. So we've sent those home and we can maintain control.
That's great. And we'll have a bunch of things on other hardware. Mobile communications is not just your cell phone. It's also, you know, like voice over IP, office phone systems, which are portable. And there's a variety of other things we'll get to. Keep going.
Let me just make a quick comment. I have voice over IP phones. When I left my office, I took with me the receptionist phone, plugged it into the router in my home 150 miles away in Connecticut, and the puppy works just like it was sitting in my office. I marvel at it every time it rings.
And electronic filing systems with remote access to those files, obviously a super important aspect of this, being untethered. Being able to function from an accounting perspective, enter time, run bills, post payments, do a bank rec, and not be in your office to do that. Some kind of a way to share client database. Or shareable client database, some way of disseminating to everybody else what already happened, what is yet to occur, what tasks are outstanding on this, what's the status, and that often takes the form of a case management system, and there's really great options today that are web-based. Getting documents signed remotely, not just like e-notary or online notary, but also digital signature options. There's several things to talk about there. And then this goes to the okay, now everybody is working remotely and they're working with very confidential data. How do I ensure that it remains confidential? And then just a few things about home workspace setup that we have recommendations on. So that's kind of the roadmap.
2 quick comments. Just so you know, Baron covered a lot of ground. This is just a checklist. Time permitting, Baron is going to elaborate on all this, and more important than just elaborating and explaining, he's going to give you very specific suggestions. So if you're working at home remotely and you're struggling and have a challenge, Baron's not just going to tell you conceptually what to do. He's going to give you recommendations of equipment that will solve your problem. And again, take-home message. Everybody approaches this differently. Mary has an actual home office where she goes, closes the door perhaps, and works in a home office environment where she can concentrate. I sit in the living room in the armchair with the dog around, my wife around, and my laptop on my lap. So you got to figure out within all of these different checklist items what works for your style, what makes you comfortable. And it'll be different for different people in a firm. So let's go on. Baron?
Yep. So this practice portability, you're going to have it. It's an insurance policy now. It's like any other insurance. You've got to be able to practice from anywhere. Internet reliance. So just to give you an example, we had a main internet connection cut to our office a couple of years ago. They were doing utility work in the road in front of our office building. Took two days to get that back. I had to send everybody home. So luckily, we have 3 internet service providers that come into our building. So we actually got a backup internet connection. It's not nearly as fast or expensive as the main one, but kind of like the same reason that Marty might carry around 2 different hotspots from different cell networks. You might want to do that if you have the option to do so at home and or office, just to have a backup so that you're not completely down in the event the main one gets severed. I think more people.
Yeah, we actually do the internet backup. So we have our main service and a second service that comes into the building, and we maintain it at just a level that's sufficient to get us running if the other one goes down.
Exactly. And then I think more people are going to dial into the idea that I can actually hire people who are best for the job, not really pay so much attention to where they live. Web meetings. I think before this, if somebody said they were say they're in Columbus where I am, they said, hey, I want to meet with you. If I said, how about we do a web meeting instead? I would have felt that to be kind of rude to even suggest it. And I don't think that's going to be considered rude going forward. In fact, I think it's going to be preferred now that so many people have done this, you're prepared for it, and you know it's actually a more efficient way to meet.
It's definitely more efficient, and the world has changed. If there's a barking dog or a crying baby in the background, you know, a month ago, everybody would have gone, oh, so unprofessional. No one cares.
That's right. And because of the rules, so in 2012, the American Bar Association promulgated rule changes to the rules of professional conduct to deal with the use of technology in the practice of law. That, of course, affected no one, but as to this point, 38 states, including where I am, have adopted those changes. And one of the changes is the definition of competence, and then specifically the highlighted language that you see there is the new language that was added, and that has really changed things. It doesn't seem like much, but it was the first time we saw the word technology in the rules of professional conduct, and some states like North Carolina and Florida have taken that so seriously they now require technology CLE credits in each reporting period. But everybody needs to pay attention to this, and ultimately it means you can no longer disclaim how to use knowing how to use the technology tools necessary to do your job. And if somebody makes a mistake and, for example, violates Rule 1.6 confidentiality, then if you read Rules 5.1 and 5.3, as a supervising attorney, that can end up being your fault anyway, even though you didn't make the mistake. So it's a new world, and the rule changes are also feeding into that.
Let me give a quick
Darren,
comment. 1 second, Mary. Practical comment. With this new remote environment, if it's new for your firm, for your practice, what you may want to do is have a consultant like Barron or somebody remote in and do a survey of what you're using and how you're doing it and give you recommendations or actually help you improve or fix a problem. One of the requirements is that you must take reasonable measures under the rules of professional conduct. What's a reasonable measure? In my view, if I have an IT consultant review everything and tell me what I need to fix and I fix it, I've taken a reasonable measure. This is really important because many people are going remote for the first time and they have not addressed this. Mary?
So you kind of addressed what I was going to, and I was going to ask Barron one question, make one comment. And one of the comments I thought Barron made that we should elaborate a little on is the importance that if we have staff members that we've sent remote and they violate confidentiality, that responsibility is ours. And so learning how to manage others remotely is hugely important. The question I was going to ask Barron, Marty has addressed a little bit, but that whole technological maintaining competence, Barron, what do you think that really looks like? Because some people think technological competence means I know how to open Word and start a document, right? But I don't think that's what we're going to see in the future. Do you have a brief?
I'll give you an easy example. Let's say that you have a requirement to redact personally identifiable information from a pleading that you're going to electronically case file in federal court. You may say, I am not ever going to do that. I've never done it. I hire people to do that. The question is that a defendable position? And I think it is if you confirmed you had the technology necessary to redact and you wrote down the steps on how to do that successfully using your technology. Let's say it's Adobe Acrobat DC Pro, and you sat down with the person you've hired to do that for you at least once and made sure they knew how to follow the instructions. Then I think if they do make a mistake, then you're in a safe harbor because you clearly used reasonable precautions. But if you didn't do any of those three things and a mistake is made, then I think the responsibility flows to you. So it's one of those things where you can say, I don't do that, I don't perform that particular task. But you got to at least, as the supervising attorney, you've got to make sure you have the right tools and that the tools are being used correctly. And so something like Paul Manafort's lawyers botching that redaction in January of 2019, and it was immediately disclosed because you could select the text behind the redaction and copy and paste it into Word and read the whole thing. Like, those things have got to stop happening. And I'm sure that the lawyers representing Paul Manafort weren't the ones who botched the redaction. It was somebody else. But because of 5.1 and 5.3, it becomes their fault.
I just wanted to make one more comment, Darren. Go ahead.
So something I did that I think is very practical that if you have not done, my staff is in my office are working at home. They're using their own laptops. Before we started doing that, I had my IT consultant remote into each laptop and confirm that it had all the appropriate virus protection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody saves any documents on their laptop. They only use Go to My PC to remote into the office, so there is nothing on their laptops that could be confidential. And by remoting into the office through the Go to My PC portal, there's additional protection should anyone ever see their laptop. There's nothing there. Mary?
So the comment I just wanted to make, you had mentioned the importance of using a consultant. I think both you and I use Affinity, and Barron's Group, and I work with different people. And I'm not necessarily, I mean, I do think Barron's Group is great, but what I think is really important when you work with a consultant is finding somebody who will understand how you practice and come up with the approach that works for you, because everybody's different. So in working on this, Jonathan, Marty, and I, like, we each have very different approaches. And so when I go to, some consultants are tied to the product they sell, where other consultants, and that would be, Barron's Group would be one example of that, they aren't tied to, they're familiar with all the products, and you'll see that in these slides as we go. The Barron can tell you about almost every product that suits. And so that really helps design a system that works for the way that you work.
Barron, back to you.
Okay. So electronic filing system, we're not talking about eliminating all paper. We're talking about having less of it. And every office, nearly every office, could have less paper. And the less paper you have, the less labor that's required, the more easily you can find information, the better everything is.
What do people do now, Barron, if they just got thrust into remote work?
Well, this is something that is like okay, when this is over, I'm going to start building this. It's not easy to do it if you've already, you went home and you didn't have any kind of a good electronic filing system. You're going to be kind of tethered to the office. You might have to go back and forth. But a lot of it is you have to step off the edge, and you have to have, as we're going to discuss, there's a whole lot of things that go into successfully reducing paper. It's obviously not just having scanners.
But you don't have to wait until the so-called normal times return, because we may have all sorts of variations in normal, and you can start some of this now, and you probably should. So I have some colleagues I know that actually called me, and they for the first time bought scanners to have at home, so if they mark up a document, they're scanning it and sending it back to associates or junior partners to review. Well, they've taken that plunge. They've stepped off the cliff that Barron just mentioned, and I think they'll be very happy for it in the short order.
And surprisingly, you can actually still get scanners. I mean, you can't buy webcams right now. They're sold out everywhere. I thought for sure that scanners would be one of those things that you couldn't get, but you can. They're in stock, and you can have one shipped to your office or home in a couple of days.
And one of the things on going paperless right now is, even if you haven't been in the past, right? Like I've been paperless for a long time, but how we got there was just by taking this moment and saying, from this day forward, anything I am going to do is going to be done paperless, and don't get hung up on the fact that you might still have a bunch of red wells and files and paper. You can get that incorporated into the system as you go. Just don't create any more paper going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We've never advocated that you should go back and convert all your old files. It's the best approach typically is, from this point forward, I will simply stop contributing to the mess. And if you just take that approach, you're going to do really good. You just say, for the new stuff I get, we're going to move that over. Sometimes you take your active matters and you move them over to a less paper or paperless file, but you can leave the old stuff alone and focus on what's in front of you.
And if nothing else in this environment, if you get a scanner, and Barron said they're available, and he's got recommendations in the PowerPoints of specific equipment you can buy that's easy to use at home, just start scanning what you have at home and emailing it to your staff instead of having somebody exposed to traveling and so on and so forth to get the files. Just start. Once you get your feet wet, you're not going to go back. Barron?
Yeah, so you've got two main choices to handle this, to set up an electronic filing system. You either use plain old folders on a server or in some kind of cloud storage, but I recommend that you get a search utility in addition to that, which we'll define. Or you can go with a document management system, which is a software program that's basically a complete electronic filing system for everything. And there's a bunch of additional functionality you get with the DMS that you don't get with plain folders and search utility, which we'll elaborate on. Go ahead. And
what I always kind of share about that is, because I went paperless again in 2005, and at that point I had, a 73-year-old lawyer who had struggled to turn a computer on, who I had to take paperless. And so what we did was created, they're used to having these folders, and like you're looking at that picture shows the Windows file structure. what we did is create that Windows file structure, and I showed the lawyers who were used to working in that environment that I could create that file structure. If they really wanted me to print out their file the way they'd had it, I could do that in 5 minutes. And then we actually took that system, and to this day, we still have a folder structure that underlies our document management system. So we put both of those pieces together in a way that the different lawyers' minds work in different ways, so you can develop a system that uses both.
Very true. So this was really just gleaned from 8,000 law firm clients that, the ones that were successful in reducing paper and building an electronic filing system that everybody worked with. What were the common denominators among all of those folks? And you can kind of tap through all these until the screen is full. It goes down to 9, I think. So anyway, having a backup system, if people are worried that they're going to lose contact with the electronic files, they will not rely on them. And if that is an insecurity that people feel, that can be remedied with better backup systems. On a hardware side, some weird things, surprising things maybe, I think. Desktop scanners turned out to be a key thing. Being able to see more than one thing electronically simultaneously, so dual monitors, the ability to review documents on the screen. It doesn't work for everybody, but if your screen rotates to portrait and you can see the entire page of text without page down, that makes it possible for some people. And then making sure, I go into offices, they're scanning everything and they have no portable electronics. Everything is desktop. So you obviously can't take your file with you if that's the case. Searchable PDFs, which we'll define, required so that you can find them again. You got to make that choice previously described, a search program or a DMS. If you're not going to do a DMS, then you got to have one folder per matter. And the point there is simply, in most offices we go into, if you look at where all their stuff is stored, the top layer of folders is not practice area or client names, it's a user's name. So like in my office, the firm I worked for out of law school, they did the same thing. Everybody had their initials folders. So if 3 people work on the same file, there would be a folder under those 3 individuals' initials that was for that matter, and there would be some files in each one of those folders, but they were never consolidated in a single folder. And even though intellectually that makes no sense and we knew it, that's what we did. And people protected their files. They didn't want other people touching their stuff. You would never manage your paper files that way, but electronically, a lot of times, if I want to find a case file electronically, I got to know which lawyer worked on it because it's under their folder. And that is not going to work going forward. Plus, you got to have a file naming convention that everybody adheres to. Otherwise, people make up wacky things that make sense to them and nobody else. Everything that comes in your office has got to be digitized. Your email cannot remain sitting in your inbox. You've got to be able to get those emails out without printing them into something else that is shareable. You got to have some way to share all these electronic files outside of email. Sometimes they're just too big to share that way, and maybe it's an insecure way to do it. And then finally, you got to write everything down because there's got to be people are going to fall off the wagon, and you have to have defined the wagon they fell off of so you can show them how to get back on. And if it was just some verbal thing, this is why we're going to do it, there's nothing to point to. So you write it down, you provide training, and don't expect that if it's reasonably complicated that anybody's going to figure it out by clicking around. That just doesn't work. If it only takes a half hour, it only takes a half hour.
So I was just gonna make a couple comments on that. So one of the things when we first went paperless, I'll admit my concern was, if I lose access to the internet. So for a long time, I'll just admit that I carried around, and I would back everything up onto an external hard drive once a week so that I could plug that in if all else failed. I don't do that anymore, but at one point that was like, okay, if everything else fails, I backed up all my client files to this external hard drive, and we do have a file folder system underlying our document management system, so I would copy those files and take them home. The file naming conventions is really important, and that's so that everybody's naming things the same way so that you can find them. And so we've built in our document management system, we have actually conventions, and you can populate in World Docs. I think you can do the same thing in NetDocs, so that they just pull up and populate. But even before we went to a document management system, we had document naming conventions. And what we would do, the other thing Baron mentioned is the training thing, is we do once a week a 30-minute huddle every Thursday at 1:30, where our whole firm, and it's a mandatory huddle, gets on the phone, and we just do reminders on saving the emails, how to do it, the file name conventions, or whatever we're seeing that people are doing inconsistently. Because the biggest mistake is to take 2 days of training and then you don't continue to follow up because everybody's busy, goes back to what they were doing before. So we just every week take 30 minutes and always provide, here's one new trick that you can implement this week.
Yeah, and there's got to be accountability, and a lot of times, there'll be a couple of lawyers have decided to jump off the wagon, and they don't like the way everybody else does it, and then all the people that work for them on their team also jump off the wagon, and then you can pretty quickly end up back where you were in the first place if you don't get them back on.
And by the way, everybody, there's no reason you can't very slowly start some of this, even in the current work at home environment, with a Zoom or GoToMeeting, a web-based meeting with your staff, and start slowly implementing changes. You can use this time, however difficult it may be to work remotely, to start the process.
Yep. So let's go to backup real quick. I just want to get through that super fast. All right, just a couple of points here. You want to back up. Ideally, you have more than one occurring simultaneously. It happens without anyone having to remember to do something for it to occur. You have someone in your office, it's their job to confirm that it worked, because all backups produce some kind of a backup log telling you what they did or didn't do. And we've had way too many clients think they were having a backup that worked, and then when something went sideways, and recently it's been ransomware. Ransomware is ineffective if you have a backup. And so all the people that had to pay Bitcoin and all the people who were taken offline because of that, all that means is they didn't have a backup, because if they had a backup, they could have restored all their files and kept working. So you got to make sure that that's happening, and there's got to be some way for people to verify it, and it needs to be verified on a daily basis. And then the final point on this, and I'll skip some of these, is you want to have versions. So if you don't know, you ask your IT person. I want versions because we create new files from old files. People overwrite old files all the time. I should be able to get those old files back. If you got any kind of database involved in your practice, they can get corrupted. And you might have to go back 6 days or 5 days to get the last version that wasn't corrupted. So I want to know, how many versions of files do I have? That's what you ask. An incremental backup means you have only the most recent copy of everything. So if I had a Word file that I created last week and I open it today and I make some changes to it and I save on top of it, I want to be able to get the one that I had previously, possibly. And if it's an incremental backup, I only have the one I updated. So that's it might be a number of days. They might say you have 30 days of backups on all files. That would be great. Ideally, I'd like at least 7 full rolling copies of everything. Any way you can get more versions provides more protection. And that's really all I want to say about that. What I do on my own, since I'm really, most of my life that I care about is on my laptop. I have lots of online things. Most of my files are already backed up via document management systems and other things. But just to make sure that if anything dies on my laptop, I don't have to recreate everything from scratch. To show you how inexpensive this is, Carbonite, their cheapest plan, $72 a year, unlimited storage, and unlimited versions. Every single file, it keeps a version of. If I open a file, save on top of it, and do that every day for 30 days, I have 30 versions. It doesn't even tell me it's doing it, but I can look at all of those versions and I can restore any of them that I want. You get a $90 external hard drive, like 3 terabytes. It's a stupid amount of space. You get a Cronus True Image for $35. That's not a subscription. That's a one and done perpetual license, and it makes a mirror of my entire internal hard drive to the external hard drive whenever I run it. So I've got Carbonite running in the background all the time, offsite storage. I've got this running when I'm in the office like I am right now, and I already made my backup today of that. And my total cost, my only recurring cost, is $72 a year, and $120 maybe for the rest of it. So it's not expensive to build a really good duplicate system to pretty much eliminate the possibility that you could lose something that you want. Okay, just a couple of things about this. Success stories used distributed scanning. We go into an office, almost always we see there's little personal printers on every desk, and if you want to scan something, you got to go to the copier. What we would prefer to see is scanners on every desk for the people that want to do that, and centralized printing. So decentralized scanning and centralized printing. That's turned out to be one of the keys to success for firms that do this. In the future, you're going to scan more and print less. And copiers, if I have to go to the copier to make all my scans, it's just disruptive. And walking to the copier, scanning something, I got to identify myself on the touchpad. I scan it, I got to go back to my desk, and typically in most offices, it's emailed to the user as an attachment. So then they got to wait for it to show up, right-click, save as, double-click, double-click, double-click to find the folder, and then give it a name that means something, because it almost always has a date timestamp as a file name, which is obviously useless. If it's a letter, I want to call it a letter. So all of that, every time someone scans like that, we've timed it. It takes on average 7 minutes if you want to scan at the copier. Whereas if I was scanning at a desktop, and I have a scanner right next to me, it might take 10 seconds. So it's not disruptive. It's either very disruptive or not disruptive at all. And the difference is, where's my scanner?
And by the way, if you're working in a remote home environment today and you don't have a scanner and you're not scanning documents, order one. It can be shipped and delivered to your home. You plug it in, set it up. They're mostly very intuitive to work. If you feel that it's uncomfortable to do that, have an IT consultant call you on FaceTime and walk you through it. Get it set up and start scanning now. When you go back to your office, I promise you, if you've just scanned for the few more weeks that you're primarily at home, documents that you need to send to other people in your office, if you're not used to doing it, when you get back to your office, you will not function without having your own scanner. You don't have to wait. This is for now, not just the future.
Okay, next, this is just what we look for in a scanner, and I'll just skip over this because I have actual scanner recommendations. Now, there's two main kinds of scanners. There's flatbed and there's Sheetfed. A flatbed scanner has a lid with glass like a copier. You would only need one of those if you were scanning books and magazines, which most people are not doing today. If you have a copier, it can already do that. So we don't recommend those kind. Instead, we recommend Sheetfed, which you see on the screen now. And if you tap your button one more time, it'll highlight the one that we highly recommend, which is the ScanSnap iX 1500. This is Windows or Mac. Right now, it's actually $399 on Amazon.com in stock. It scans front and back simultaneously and automatically deletes blank pages. The 3060 that you see there on the screen means 30 pages a minute single-sided, 60 double-sided. It automatically detects paper size. It automatically detects color or black and white. It even knows if you scan it upside down because you didn't look at the little icon showing you how to feed paper, it'll automatically make it right side up before it shows it to you. It comes with the cable to connect, and it'll also scan wirelessly. So it's got a free ScanSnap app. You can scan directly into any wireless device. The easiest to use software I've ever seen that comes with the scanner. And the little touch screen there with those little buttons you can barely see, you actually get to define what those buttons are called and what they do. So like my leftmost button on my ScanSnap says 400 DPI B&W, which means black and white. So obviously if I push that button, it's going to scan whatever I put in the feeder at 400 dots per inch black and white. Completely easily controllable, and it's the #1 selling scanner for a reason.
My entire office, everybody has on their desk, and at our home we have as well the ScanSnap. We hired an outside firm to scan like large volumes, like crates of old files when we went completely paperless. But the workhorse of our going paperless and staying paperless is exactly what you see on the screen. It's an incredible thing, just as Baron described.
Now, as you step up in speed, you step up in price, but these scanners as a footprint are no bigger. So you could get a really fast 6120. And it's the same software. The ScanSnap software you can actually get on these Fujitsu scanners to make them just as easy to use as the less expensive model, but you're getting all the same functionality just at a much faster speed. They make portables. I actually wouldn't recommend the bottom left one because it's really annoying to try to feed pages in one at a time. I would actually rather use my cell phone to take pictures of the documents. But the ScanSnap S1300 isn't bad because it has a sheet feeder. But if you look at the price there, the speed, 8 pages a minute, single, 16 double, it's pretty slow. And honestly, the iX 1500 is portable. You can even get carrying cases for them. So if I need to go home and work from home, I'll just take my ScanSnap with me. I don't need to in my opinion, I don't really need a portable scanner unless I'm constantly on the road with it. we talked about monitors that rotate and that being important. So a 22-inch monitor is the cheapest thing you get today, $99 most places. I just wanted to show you how much bigger it makes a document if you rotate to portrait. And that's really a function of the stand. If you don't have monitors that do that, all you got to do is get a new stand. And if your monitor is like 7 years old or more recent, then it's probably VESA compliant. Just go to Amazon.com and Google or put in a search for VESA monitor stand, and you'll see they have hundreds of them. So these stands cost typically $30 to $50, but you can take this stand off your old monitor you've had, and you can put it on one of these, and guess what they all do? They tilt, swivel, and rotate. So it's easy to make your old monitors do a new trick. And why do I go 2 monitors instead of 1? Because it's way cheaper, frankly. So I have 2 of these Scepter 27-inch monitors, which at the time I bought them, they were $159 each. And if you go up to 49 inches or higher, you're easily going to pay more than $1,000. And I like the fact that they're curved. They kind of wrap around me. Once you use a curved monitor, you'll never want to use a flat one again. Just saying. You got to have the mobile. Go ahead go ahead. To searchable PDF. I just want a couple of points here. You definitely want to rely on PDFs because it's an open standard, it's open source. Adobe gave up their patent rights to that standard in 2008, so it's the only file type I can absolutely guarantee you'll be able to open in 20 years. I can't say that about Word files, I can't say that about WordPerfect or anything else, but you can definitely say that about PDFs. And they will look exactly on anyone else's computer as they looked on yours. And that's another, you can't say that about Word files either. So you've got integrity with how it's going to look when you send it to someone else and they look at it on their phone, their tablet, or their computer. Go ahead. So there's 2 kinds. There's searchable PDFs and image-only PDFs. And most people are familiar with the searchable PDFs. You open a PDF and you recognize the fact that you can select text, you can hit Control-F for find, and you can search for text. Those are the kind of PDFs you get if you make one from Word, WordPerfect, Excel, email, or whatever. However, your copier, so I have 2 layers in those PDFs. I have an image layer and I have a text layer. And that becomes important because if I've been scanning PDFs for a long time, and let's say I have 500,000 of them, I'm not going to remember their file names. I'm not going to remember the client's folder that I put that in. I'll remember something that might be contained within that file. And I'm going to need to do a full text search in order to locate that PDF. Well, that not all PDFs have text for you to search. And the ones that come from copiers specifically do not. They only have the photograph layer. That's an image-only PDF. So the problem with that is then someone's going to have to touch it. Every time you scan something on your copier, you're going to have the optical character recognition run on it so it buries the text underneath, and you have some chance of finding it again. Now, all of those little desktop scanners I showed you earlier, they all have the capability of converting a image-only PDF to a searchable PDF at the time the scan occurs. So they can do what a copier cannot, and they can do it on the fly. So that's another reason why we prefer that over a copier as the sole source. Now, let me just say one thing about search programs. Here's the thing. I know Windows has Windows Instant Search and a Mac has Spotlight. And don't they work pretty well? Yeah, of course they do. However, if I get 200 hits and I do a Windows Instant Search, it does not, if you think about legal research, when you do a search and it shows you the hits, you click on a hit and it immediately shows you a viewer and it shows you the words you were searching for highlighted typically in yellow within the paragraph that contains those words. And that allows you to instantly know, is this the one I want? Now, if you think about how your computer does this natively, all it shows you is the hit. You don't know if it's the one you want. You got to open that and then do another search once the file is open for your search terms to see where they are within the document to see if that's the one you want. A good search utility does that for your files. So like Copernic and X1, if I get 200 hits, I can go click, 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 and each time I click on a new hit, over on the right side of the screen or at the bottom of the screen, it shows me the search terms in context. So I know I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is a huge deal in terms of making it faster for you to locate the files you were looking for. And some of these, so for Windows, I'd recommend either X1 or Copernic. On Mac, if you tap the spacebar one time, Hootspot is better than Spotlight. These programs are incredibly inexpensive. And I'll say this for Copernic. It'll also search Outlook. It'll search all the folders you've made in Outlook and all the attachments to all the emails in all the folders, so that you can actually search through all of those things by the words contained inside them. Outlook can't even do that for itself, but Copernic can. And it has, all these have free trials, by the way. So you can test drive these things without even spending the paltry amount of money they cost. If you want to go document management, here are your big players. If you want the best online option, I think NetDocuments is pretty far out in front there, but all of these have web-based remote accessed options. NetDocuments just has only ever done that for their entire corporate existence, so they have a bit of a head start. Hit it again. You want to comment, Mary?
So that's just in our folder structure. The consistent file naming convention is really important. And even if you don't have a document management system, what I suggest to attorneys is you just start now by naming things consistently. And one of the examples I always use is because how you name things and how you get others to name them is your ability to find them as you go paperless, whether it's file folder structure or a document management system. So one of the examples I always use is trust. So I worked at a law firm where they created files, and one person would, they just let everybody create files. One person would create a file called irrevocable life insurance trust. Another person would create a file called crummy trust, and another person would name it some other variation of that. They all refer to the same type of trust generally, but we'd have 3 different file names. And then when they save the actual document, one person might name it irrevocable life insurance trust for John Doe, and another person would name it John Doe's crummy trust. And so if you're searching, trying to find all the trusts of that type that you drafted for the last couple of years, you can't do that. And if somebody else is looking for your document, so we created naming benches such as like every trust has to start with TR, and then we have different ways, and we say, okay, if it's any of these 10 types of trust, it gets named the same way. And we've actually built that into our document management system. So we have a set of templates where you can grab it. But long before we were in document management, we had these naming conventions and had everybody start saving them. And the other thing is we don't allow any miscellaneous, and we allow no saves to the desktop. So at one firm I was at, people would, instead of saving it into the document management system, they would save it to their desktop. Well, then if somebody else is trying to process or deal with that file and stuff is saved on the desktop, I mean, you're essentially committing malpractice because they don't have access to the whole file. And just from a client service perspective, so we got rid of miscellaneous, and in our world, there's no way to bypass the saving of documents.
We do a similar thing, but the challenge, which Mary has explained, you have to constantly keep after it. And if somebody saves something in, I hate to call it an unauthorized or one-off fashion, you have to sit down and explain to them the conventions that are used. So just hiring an IT consultant is not going to be enough. You have to keep up with it. But the efficiencies that naming conventions create are huge, huge. And there's no reason that you can't start doing something now, even if you're working remotely, because if for the first time you're not having the access to staff, naming conventions may just work and make it easier to work for you in this new remote environment, which, as Baron started in the beginning, it's not going away. This is the future, and it's going to stay like this. Baron?
Yeah, so this is just a convention that a lot of folks use. The date, you precede it with a date, and then it sorts chronologically whenever you click File Open to a folder. You got to lead with a year in order for that to occur. You have 255 characters to name a file, so that's like 2 sentences. You can be descriptive if you want to do that. Go ahead. So your electronic filing system, a lot of times it's only containing stuff that people created or things they had to email to somebody else. It's usually missing email, attachments to email sometimes, faxes and notes. And that there has to be a concerted effort to capture that stuff and make sure that it gets into the electronic file so that people can rely on it, and you can start doing that anytime you want. If you've got a fax machine which is injecting paper into your workflow, you can easily sign up for one of the many internet fax services, and you can keep your fax number. We went with Ring Central. We were paying $45 a month for the phone line alone, and plus we had to keep paper and toner in the stupid fax machine. The Ring Central, instead of $45 a month for the phone line, which I got rid of, I pay $12 a month now. Same fax number I always had, and all of my incoming faxes are emailed me as PDFs, so I don't have to scan something. It's already digital, and then I can also send faxes electronically as long as the documents I want to scan are, you know, Word, PDF, or something I've scanned. I can do it from email or I can do it from their app, and it's very easy.
Quick comment. As you go to electronic fax, if you haven't done it before, you have to do it now, and you can do this today by just signing up and getting your office fax number converted. You then get an email of it, so it makes it very easy to then send that to anyone in your staff. If you have a physical fax machine, and I'm hoping nobody still does, but if you have a physical fax machine in your office, who's retrieving those faxes to scan them and process or distribute them? So you should do this immediately if you're working in a remote home environment. And the other thing is, once you get your faxes electronic, you can also have your phone system in your office as well as your cell phone and everything else all go to a transcription service where everything is transcribed and sent also to your mail. So you can basically live out of your email inbox, which is incredibly efficient and eliminates having to look in multiple places for communications.
Yeah, and so sometimes firms will say, okay, we're going to scan every piece of mail that comes in the office. The problem is half of the mail is garbage, and then they have to delete the stuff that they wasted time scanning. If people have their own scanners, it actually takes more time for me to take a document and write on a sticky note, Barb, please scan this into the ABC file, and then walk it out to Barb. I could have scanned it 3 times by the time I handed it to Barb. So it's a bad use of my time, and it's annoying to her. So it'd be much better if I could just scan it myself. And most people, as soon as you try it and see how fast and simple it is, I'd rather distribute the mail to everybody and let them scan what they want to keep.
I would tell you that we actually do have the scanning as it comes in, but we've just created a really good policy about these are the items that get scanned, and those that don't get scanned get distributed. And I tell you, we're pretty successful by just constantly reviewing what gets scanned.
That's good. Yeah, you've got as long as the person doing it knows what needs to be scanned and what should be discarded or not scanned at all, you're fine. But you know, if you got a high volume, that becomes more difficult.
And by the way, if you're working in a remote environment, Barb or maybe Bill are not around to scan for you. Buy a scanner if you don't have one and just start doing it.
Printing email is just self-punishment, and so nobody's ever found a critical piece of information on a printed email they couldn't find anywhere else unless they have a terrible email management system. So I know why people do that, because you've got a piece of correspondence that's electronic and I need to put it somewhere where other people can find it, but you're much better off saving it electronically. If you open up an email in Outlook, for example, and you go File, Save, it'll save it to an MSG file, and that is a proprietary Microsoft file, which there's no guarantee you'll be able to open in the future. Again, PDF makes that easy. So if you do a PDF, and one of the things, if you tap to the next thing, one of the cool things about the good PDF programs is they integrate with Outlook, and the difference is, so if I have both Power PDF and Acrobat on my computer, and they added buttons to Outlook. So if I open up an email that has 6 Word files attached, and I use the Adobe Convert to PDF button instead of printing to PDF, not only do I get a PDF as you would expect, but it actually stores the Word files inside the PDF. So if I forgot to separately save them, or I open it up 2 years later, I can actually double click the names of the attachments within the PDF and they open. And it's not a hyperlink. They're actually buried inside the PDF. I could email it to somebody else. They would also have the Word files that were contained in that email. So it's just a good backstop if people are not always saving attachments as they should. And all of those listed provide that functionality.
And that's, Baron, just repeat again for anyone that didn't hear like me, what that was called?
If you go into, it's called just integration. So if I have Adobe Acrobat DC, it integrates with all versions of Outlook. So if I have Outlook on my computer already and then I install Adobe Acrobat DC, it will add buttons to Outlook. And those buttons make it faster and easier to create PDFs, but they also capture attachments, which if you just print a PDF, you just get a flat file. You get the names of the attachments, but you don't get the attachments. PDFs, in addition to being digital sandwiches that can contain text that you can search for, they're also buckets that can hold other files. So you can have Excel files and WordPerfect files and Word files and other PDFs all inside a PDF. And if you send somebody that PDF, they also are getting all of those additional files. So you got to have some way to share these things. There's lots of options. My favorite service is ShareFile of these. A great way to obtain files from people and to send files to them without using email and do it in a secure way. In addition, depending on the plan you sign up for, they also have a pretty cool email encryption program that you can use with Outlook to make sure that if you are going to send it via email, only the intended recipient can open it.
And by the way, one of the other things ShareFile has, which is really beyond what we're doing today, but just we find it great. We use ShareFile. We use their encryption. We create separate, if you will, vaults for each client and post all the estate planning documents for each client in their own personalized ShareFile vault that they can set the password for. And since we started doing that, we rarely get a client call and ask us for a document, and if they do, we tell them it's available on their ShareFile vault. All they have to do is get it, and it's a huge time saver and a great service for clients. And especially apropos to our discussion today during this COVID challenging time, tragedy that we're living through, ShareFile has an app, so somebody can have an app on their smartphone and download their documents. God forbid somebody goes to the hospital, forgot to take their healthcare proxy, and they're asked for it, they can pop it right onto their smartphone. Baron?
Yeah, and ShareFile, we have a lot of estates and trust lawyers that use ShareFile, and you can create a secure little location. You could scan all your clients' estate planning documents and park them in this secure location, and then give your clients download access to that secure location, which they could share with loved ones or whoever, and it's a very convenient delivery mechanism. If you have a case management program, almost all of them have a portal feature now where you can share documents within the program itself and not even subscribe to anything extra. So this is an example of the Clio Connect, which comes with the Clio system. And you can say, with this, you can share not just documents, I can share case information, I can share tasks. Like I can allow my client to check on the status of their case unilaterally without me doing anything through a lot of these portal options. So the training is very important. It doesn't take long. It makes sure that everybody is getting the most out of the technology that you invested in. And you can cover a lot of different things here. Like if we're going to work at home, here are the things. You can have policies that go along with this. Here's how we do it. Make sure you're following the protocols. Remember that security is of utmost importance. And of course, we've had to have that conversation with all of our non-lawyer employees anyway. Otherwise, they can't work for us unless they agree to abide by the rules of professional conduct.
Baron, did you want to comment?
Go ahead.
Mary?
So, well, developing the protocols, and I guess if Baron has to jump here in a minute, we can come back to the cheat sheet because I like to talk about that a little bit. But Baron, I just want to ask you to at least address your top, security tips for working remote.
Well, everyone has to understand that they can't use personal devices unless the devices are locked down. Marty took the extra step of having people, someone log into remote computers and make sure that they are locked down. Your client data needs to be protected so that nobody else, even in the family, a lot of people don't understand that. They're like, well, it's my wife. Like, what's the big deal? It's not okay. And so that's part of the things that have to be in the policy. We got to say you're not allowed to store stuff on the local device, or if you are going to store things on the local device, then that device has to be secured. People have to understand, you got to have an antivirus, you got to download the updates for the operating system. You can't use Windows 7. You can't use like Word 2007, which isn't supported anymore and isn't getting security updates. Those kind of things, people, it's not, why would they know that? So you have to explain that. Having a remote security policy, having a password policy, and making sure everybody understands. And a lot of this goes back to, if you get it all written down and it's in an employee manual, then you can simply point to that and say, just make sure you're following these steps.
And to have it in the employee manual, so my thing is, like, I remind my administrator on a regular basis who will say, well, it's in the manual, but you have to continue to share it and remind, which is what we do at our huddle as we keep pulling that up. What about, can you speak to the password manager concept as well?
Yeah, we actually rolled out Dashlane password management to all employees, because there are certain assets, services and things that I want to share with other employees, and I want a secure way of doing that. The password managers also will make up passwords for you that are super strong. Like I can go 20 characters, random mix of numbers, letters, and symbols with mixed case, and then it remembers them for you. So like a password manager is the easiest way to upgrade overall your security profile. And we felt so strongly about that we wanted everyone to use one. And in our case, they have a private vault and they have a Affinity Consulting vault. And if they were to leave our employment, they can keep their private vault, but they immediately lose access to the corporate side. And that works really well, and it makes it super easy to share passwords with other people, particularly in view of the fact that we are constantly changing and updating passwords in order to make them even harder to break. And I've got to go. So
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Baron.
Yeah,
Really
thanks,
appreciate it. Baron's contact information is on the last slide in the slide deck. If anybody wants to contact him, which I recommend, he's great. And if we'd given him 6 hours and put in enough quarters, he would have kept going. Mary, why don't you tell everyone about your cheat sheets, and then I'll just say how wonderful you are with them.
So, well, and then I saw some of yours yesterday as well. So I think we have the same approach. But one of the ways I always tell stories is my mother taught me when I was growing up that if you can read, you can do anything. And I've always had that policy for my practice in terms of as many years as I've been doing it. I always point out to everyone that I'm the only one who's been here for the entirety of my practice. So this is kind of how we do it. And once you follow it, you can follow this cheat sheet. But I create like a process document for everything, including like, hey, how we do process the mail, and then we actually docket and review it. But like for, an estate plan, we have a detailed checklist. And Baron, who was just on the phone, thought, he goes, well, everybody should have this. And we've worked to automate it, but it's, step 1, run a conflict check. Step 2, open the file. And there's little places you can check off for which files you want in our document system. The checklist was actually, created before there was a lot of automation. And so we've evolved it over the years, but it goes through step by step. And the idea of the checklist is that if I bring in a new paralegal who can read, that he or she could go through the checklist and do step 1, do step 2, do step 3, potentially not even understand what he or she is doing and still be able to follow the process. So one of the things that I say is we go to automation that sometimes gets missed is, so some people have come up kind of in the whole, we have Google, we have these tools, we have the internet search. Well, they're great consumers of I'm really good at searching Google, but they couldn't tell you how the Google search tool works. And so the idea of the process behind it would be, here's the steps in the process. And then once it becomes automated, it's like magic. So we actually have for our estate plans, you can have somebody can go ahead and we can send them a little checklist that they fill out on their email. They can send that back to us. It goes into our practice management systems. And then from that system, I can create a summary that tells me about the client. And then it dumps into our document automation system as an answer file, so that there's very little re-entry of it. But what I find happens is that all looks like magic to somebody who doesn't realize that there was the process behind it. And as things change, technologies evolves, or the rules change, the way you process signatures right now, as Jonathan pointed out earlier, is dramatically different than just 2 months ago. And so as those things change, you need to be able to know what the process is. What are the steps that actually created the magic that we're now seeing in automation? And so that's kind of the cheat sheet. And we do that for everything. So our estate plan checklist is, really, really long, but we actually have a process for how to open a new matter that is actually an automated process where you can input that with the same client information. But there's a cheat sheet for everything. And I think, Marty, you do something similar but different, and you should speak a little bit to that.
So I always find it fascinating to talk to Mary. I mean, she's not only so bright and so great at technology, but it's always interesting to me how we do things differently. Her working in an office and my working in the armchair, her with her 3 screens, me with my laptop and dog. At any rate, we create cheat sheets. And Mary, is that what you also call them in your office?
We call them checklists, but a lot of times now we do turn them into process maps. So I'm good at reading. Some people are good at following a map. So we actually create both. So we have checklists and process maps.
All right. What we create is a Word document for every, and we do it primarily for tech items, but we do it for lots of other things as well. But the idea is that, for example, I finally started using during this COVID tragedy e-signature. We have a subscription to an e-sign program called Right Signature, and I learned how to use it. But we have a cheat sheet that was created that shows with screenshots that are just pasted into the Word document in text. Step 1, step 2, here's a screenshot. Step 3, step 4, here's a screenshot. So that the idea is that somebody that has no idea what right signature is, if you get the cheat sheet, you can just go through it step by step. Once you've done something a couple of times, you kind of absorb it and learn how to do it. Mary's point is valid. Things change over time and you update it. But the whole idea is if you have a cheat sheet, somebody can do it. We actually have a fairly high level folder in our computer that has all the cheat sheets. So if, for example, I'm working remotely, if I couldn't reach somebody in my office to help me walk me through, let's say, doing right signature, all I have to do is go to the place where we keep all the cheat sheets, and we call them that, and just bring up the cheat sheet for e-signature, and I can do it on my own if I have to. We do this for updating things on the network, so once we don't have to bring in our IT consultant, we can do it so it's more efficient. We do it for processes in the office. Maybe we should do more of them. But this is a great thing that if you're working remotely, if your administrative staff or manager of your office can create a cheat sheet for things, that's something that could immediately tomorrow be made available to all the partners and attorneys or other professionals working remotely. So if somebody needs to do something and they can't just call the admin who's sitting 5 feet away to come in and help them, which you can't do when you're working at home, the cheat sheet's a great option. What if you can't reach somebody? So it's a great way to make working at home easier.
Can I make another comment on that then, Marty, too? The cheat sheet is also the first step to really automating, because I actually can do a fair amount of programming myself, but it doesn't make sense for me to do it myself. And we still do a lot of document automation in Hot Docs, and I'm actually a pretty skilled Hot Docs programmer, but I actually use Baron Henley, who is just on the phone these days, because he's faster and it's a better use of my time to do it. But what I found with the cheat sheets is we have a variety of processes. And so some of the aspects of a trust administration or estate plan or forming an entity, we automate both, not just the documents, but the processes, so that time entries are automatically entered and that, there's an automatic email that goes to the Secretary of State. Items get put on a paralegal's project list just automatically, so that it's not a manual process. But how did we get there? And that's what I always tell, if you're, not doing what I'm doing, but hey, that sounds kind of fun or kind of efficient and want to get there. We started by having all those processes documented in the cheat sheet. And the advantage of that is that when I work with a consultant, they don't have to understand the technicalities of what I do. They just have to be able to follow my list, and they can take that cheat sheet and automate the process for us.
So the point of the next slide is this stuff is so inexpensive there's just simply no reason not to do it. You don't need to think or worry about it. Going paperless is inexpensive. I mean, it's almost fair to say, Jonathan or Mary, comment. I mean, cloud-based storage is almost free at this point. It's so inexpensive. So there's no reason not to take advantage of this.
And I think that, Baron made the point earlier that people are kind of still concerned about having it out on the cloud. And I would admit that I was one of those who kept data on premises as a backup. And we still actually do have one of our backup spots is on premises. So if the internet went down, I couldn't access it. I do have the ability to pull off a backup locally.
So the next slide, we talk about how remote access and being electronic solves problems with the stay-at-home environment that many of us are struggling in right now. It's inexpensive. The files are in the same place. Anybody in the entire staff can access them. It's easy to share. It's easy to collaborate. Transportable. I have every file on my laptop. If I want to access something when I can't even access the internet, I can do it. If I'm on a 10-hour plane ride, I can work for 9 hours, and it's easy to update.
And one of my favorite things about the electronic file is the story. I came out of a big firm, so my whole firm is basically recovering big firm lawyers. But at one point when I was at a big firm, what I recall is that there'd be this gigantic file room, and if somebody misfiled a document, because imagine how boring it is to sit there and put documents. The same thing with the old research services where you had to pull out pages and insert. Well, it's boring, so it's a high error rate. Somebody loses an important document, and the entire place would send like 6 secretaries. I haven't had a secretary since 2005 and wouldn't know what to do with one. But what I recall at that firm is 6 to 8 secretaries in this giant file room. The whole world stops until they find the document. And I can tell you that since we automated in 2005, and with backup, we had to pull things off. We've only had to pull stuff off of backup one time.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure what a secretary even is anymore. And if somebody on the program is using somebody in the traditional old secretarial style function, technology can free that person up to do better work and make your life easier. And I'm going to just echo a comment Baron made, because that's always something that I use as a standard. Baron said that by the time he could go in hand, and I wouldn't even call it a secretary, I'd just call it an admin person, because the old secretarial functions have largely disappeared due to technology. But by the time I'd get up and go and hand somebody something to type a letter, I can use Dragon software to dictate the letter. I can type the letter. I can pull up an old letter and modify it, which I know I shouldn't do, Mary. But the point is, there's so many easier ways. It's more, and this is the key point, what Baron suggested is so true. Many times you can do as a professional tasks that used to go to an administrative person in less time than it will take you to communicate the task to the administrative person. The reason I make most of my own appointments is with things like GoToMeeting, which we use, and Outlook meetings and stuff. Click, and I'm done. It's faster than asking somebody to do it. Sometimes you still want to for perhaps a reason in terms of the relationship and interaction with the client. But many of these tasks we can do more efficiently, and we don't have to burden a staff person with it, especially when the staff person's not right outside your door to call. Mary, do you want to talk about some of the ways that that people can sync, and I'll comment when you're done. And Jonathan, feel free to jump in if you want.
Yeah, and so first of all, you can use these various, and these are Baron's slides, where you can save your files in Dropbox, and you can have access to them yourself. Somebody else can have access to them. The one thing to be aware of when you do sync is a lot of people have this tendency to save their passwords to get into those things. So again, like you should always say, never save a password when you start syncing. So what a lot of people don't realize, for example, if you think about Google, and if you were to actually save your passwords and you go log in on some public computer, and then you get into that particular, and if you didn't log yourself back out, so you have a Gmail address, you log in, then all of your password information, if you don't log back out, is readily available. So that's one of the security risks of syncing. But so you have to not save those passwords, use a password manager. But the huge advantage of these various abilities to sync is that you can have Dropbox. I can have access I can pull that at my office if I'm there someday again. I can do it on my laptop. I can also make it available to anybody else that's using the document.
So we use Dropbox to share large files that are not confidential, such as a recording of this webinar. So when we're done with this webinar, the recording will be sent to different people, like Interactive Legal, who will post the recording on their website via Dropbox. We'll set up an account and give them access to that. We use ShareFile for all the different applications that we talked about earlier. ShareFile has a sync function. Their old sync function had some issues. We had tried it, didn't work. They have a new one which you could sync every file in your office, for example, to your laptop and vice versa. We have not yet tried that, but that is an incredible capability. What we use now is we have the second item, cloud sharing or access. We have Net Documents, which is what Baron recommended most for our document management system. It's again, this is really relating to every firm has to work the way that works for their firm, especially a smaller firm where you can have some uniqueness to your spin on it. So we have our document management system on Net Documents, which is cloud accessible by anybody, anywhere by just signing in. And then I use a VPN, a virtual private network, to log into my office and save and sync all office files to my laptop. And like Mary, I'm a bit nuts. I have 2 laptops and 2 cell phones everywhere I go because, like the old saying, and I'll say it politely, stuff happens. So I have every document. I go to my PC to work on my network. I use NetDocs to work on our document management system. I know there's some integration issues, but that works for us. So you got to find what works for us. But a key take-home point, if you don't have accessibility now and you're having to work at home or you have a staff working at home, get somebody as an IT consultant to help you get something set up and start getting access, because several colleagues that I've spoken to have physical people, staff, taking files from their home back to their office and bringing files back to their office, or they physically go into the office to drop things off and then somebody else on the staff will go in to retrieve those documents. That's incredibly inefficient and it may even be dangerous in this environment. So these are things that you can use. We have already talked about using PCs to take it with you. Myself and all of the people in our office have PCs. We've had desktops, but when we replace those, we'll probably go fully PC at this point, just like Baron was recommending. I don't think unless Mary or Jonathan have a comment, what he's got here is just some of the different options and some of the things that you want to have in a PC, and I think we can skip through that. Mary, why don't you just take a minute and talk about Baron's loving docking stations, which neither you or I have done.
Yeah, so Baron teases me a lot, and I enjoyed finding out, Marty, that you're a little bit similar to me. So I am huge as you move to technology about having redundancy. And so I have a couple laptops, I have an iPad, I have a desktop at my office, I have a standing station at my office that I actually miss quite a bit that I haven't figured out how to replicate at home. And so I'll have and then a couple phones. And Baron teases me about having too many devices, and that what I could do is have a docking station at each place that I use my computer. So at the office, I could just have a docking station. At my house, I could have a docking station. I can take my laptop and I can just dock it, and then everything will be there. And I have not quite given in to doing that. It's less expensive to use the docking stations. That's the big advantage of it. You can just use the same laptop. The reason that I'm about redundancy is I tell the story recently of having normally, and Marty and I do the same thing, I carry 2 laptops with me when I travel in addition to 2 phones, and then I have redundancy. Well, I got fairly confident in one particular laptop I was using, recently traveled to California and sat down in the pub in Minneapolis and had a black screen of death. It's like, okay, that'll be the last time I travel. So that's why I haven't gone to the docking station, but the docking station is less expensive approach to having, working from multiple locations.
One of the reasons I love to speak with Mary is she's as compulsive as I am. We approach things differently, but there's a lot of common ground. let me tell you, I've been teased plenty for traveling with 2 laptops or even having 2 redundant laptops. But I've had too many times over the last decade, and obviously the technology is getting better, but ain't nothing perfect, where I've been on a business trip and something just died on me. I was at Heckerling a number of years ago taking copious notes to do a summary of the Institute, and my laptop died. Well, I whipped out a second laptop and just started working and had my IT consultant remote into the good laptop at lunch and help me figure out how to make the dead laptop revive it. So I like the redundancy. Now, when you're working at home and you're trying to deal with the emergencies and issues and struggles of this COVID remote environment, what you need to do is address some of these issues. And you don't have to wait till you're back in the office. We don't know when that will be. So if you have any of the problems we've been talking about, you should address it. If staff doesn't have it, you can order a computer. You can order an all-in-one printer, scanner, copier, have it delivered to their home. I actually ordered an extra webcam because I'm doing so many web meetings. We've been doing them for years and years, but on the Dell laptops, which is what I have, the camera is at the bottom of the screen, so it kind of looks up at my underneath my chin, and at my age, I don't want that happening. So I wanted a camera on top, but we're not going to talk about that. Here's some configuration recommendations.
I was just wondering, it's several screens ahead, but you brought up the webcams and the web meetings, and I was just thinking we should at least address the video conferencing.
Sure.
But I think that's several slides. One other thing that's coming up in one of the slides ahead that Marty and I talked about yesterday, I think is important, is the portable postage and label printer. And so that you just clicked past because I didn't give you that warning. But what we talked about is, hey, if you have to print and mail something from home, you can get this printer and digital scale at home. So Marty was talking about, we have that at the office. That's really easy, but that's something also, if you do have to do a mailing, that you can get that at home.
And it's not that expensive, and it's very simple, and it really doesn't take a lot of space.
And this next slide covers like the portable external drive, which I used to carry around. They give a good, they have a Plantronics headset there, a couple ahead, and that's the one I use. And like, I don't know if you have a favorite. And then the next one kind of goes to the web meeting services. And given that, one of the things that UI and Jonathan wrote on recently was some of the challenges that Zoom is facing. And I will acknowledge that, I was a heavy Zoom user until I started reading all the security issues that came in. I was teaching a law school class one day, and one of the students' husbands actually works for Zoom and told me about their HIPAA product. They're supposedly working on their security and privacy issues, but they have been an issue. There is now a product you can at least get with Zoom, but I've actually come to prefer what I think, Marty, you might speak to because you're a longtime user of the GoToMeeting format.
Sure. So I've used the go-to products for many years. I spend for a charitable endeavor that my wife and I have 2 months on the road working from an RV every summer. This may be the first summer in 11 years that I'm not sure if we're going to get out because of the COVID issues. GoToMeeting is similar to Zoom in the sense that you can easily set up a meeting, sign into a meeting, you can record a meeting. And by the way, you can record and transcribe a meeting at basically no cost with no effort. And to assure that there's no legal issues, it announces before the recording starts that the meeting's going to be recorded so everyone on the line knows it. If you record and transcribe a meeting with a client, what a great way to have notes that you don't have to worry about taking. So let's say you're not a great typer because you've had staff do it. All you have to do is record a meeting, have it transcribed, and you got copious notes of everything said on the meeting if you later want to dictate a memo using Dragon software or type a memo, whatever it is you prefer. So we use GoToMeeting for client meetings, and I frankly find it more time efficient than reviewing a document in person because everyone stays focused and you don't have all the social niceties of, hi, how are you, serving coffee, and all the things we used to do in the old days before COVID. So web-based meeting programs are excellent. I've heard a lot about some of the Zoom issues. I can't comment from a technical perspective, but I've used GoTo, and the GoTo products now are owned by LogMeIn, which is a fairly large company. We use GoToWebinar, which is a software that is being used right now to generate this web meeting, and we use GoToMyPC, which I mentioned earlier, which is a software product that allows us to remote into my office desktop as if I'm sitting there from my laptop. Now, if you're fully cloud-based, you don't need to do that. We're sort of a mixture, and that's kind of what we rely on. Did you want to comment on webcams, Mary?
I wanted to go back to just one of the other programs on the previous slide, and that's just as Microsoft Teams. And I want to just mention that from the perspective of one of the challenges that a lot of people have been having with the remote work is they're used to having the internal collaboration in the office. And we shared about last week internally that one of the things is that, you know, somebody might walk down the hall and comment something, and there's one gal who seems to hear everything anybody says, and she'll walk out and say, hey, well, this might solve that problem. And it's one of the things that you miss, and then just figuring out how to connect. So we have Microsoft Teams, which is part of a lot of the Microsoft 365 products. And what we use for internal workload is that we all have Microsoft Teams on all day. So first I can see, because I've had some employers call me saying, hey, you know, my employees are logging in and then turning over, going to sleep. Well, Microsoft Teams, it shows whether you're available. But what we do is for each of our work groups. So like I have my tax, trust, and estates work group. We do a huddle first thing in the morning at 8:30. We do like a huddle after lunch. We do a huddle late in the day, just to coordinate on what we're doing with work plans, connecting and trying to recreate some of that conversation that used to happen in the hallway as you walked around. Or we used to joke that the break room was like the back conference room, because if I happened to go get a water, everybody would follow me in and try and talk to me. So trying to create a way to communicate, that's a program that seems to work really well internally.
Thanks, Mary. We have about 5 minutes to wrap up. So I have not used a professional receptionist. Like I said, my phone with an IP phone system, each phone has its own IP address. I plugged it into my router. It rings no different than at the office. I can have my phone system ring at my cell phone. And honestly, the number of phone calls has dropped dramatically as more and more people have over the years been using email. Do you have any comments on how you're handling this or what you can recommend, Mary?
I have actually tried both of these services, in that we've had lawyers over the years who felt like you still have to have somebody answer the phone. And I didn't find either of those. They try to get to know you. They may have improved since I last tried them, but I've come to, like you, I think people have gotten comfortable with emailing you. We have the voice over internet protocol, and if somebody calls me, that message is transcribed and ends up in my email within 30 seconds of their phone call. If I can't personally return the call, I have somebody else, or I send an email. So I think you get as much strength and responsiveness. But there's some people who still feel strongly about having somebody answer these phones, and they do, you know, make a good effort to try. And again, that may be a lot better service than when I tried it a few years back.
Yeah, I think what Mary just said is exactly what we do. And I think that if you're working remotely and you don't have where any phone message left on your office phone is transcribed and emailed to you pretty much immediately, you should get that in place right now. It's really great to help keep you on top of any phone calls or client matters while you're working remotely, and it avoids the need to have somebody man a phone. We have just a few minutes left. Let's just talk very quickly about signing. We mentioned it earlier. I said that we use Right Signature, which is the second item. There's a number of products out there. Right Signature, I believe, is through the company Citrix, and Baron has given you the website for that there. It's actually fairly simple to do once you get the hang of it, and it's not that bad to do it. And you can take any document and convert it for e-signature. It gets emailed out to the client or whoever. You can get back a notification when they've opened it. You get back a notification when they sign it. You get the signed document along with a certificate confirming all the facts of when it was sent, when it was signed, so on and so forth. One of the things that we've used this for is for our billing or engagement letters, retainer agreements. And the reason I do that is I'm concerned about having an initial consult with a client, not a chit chat about whether they want to retain me, but once we're starting to work, I really don't want to work without having a signed engagement letter so our relationship is clear. And how are you going to do that in this COVID age? You really don't have an office to process physical things, so on and so forth. But if you can email a billing arrangement and they e-sign it, I think that's perfectly fine in that context. It's another whole discussion about signing legal documents like that, and the world's not yet there. Jonathan and I did a program that will be aired Tuesday and will be posted to Shankman Law as well as the Interactive Legal website later next week that has an extensive discussion of various ways to e-sign documents. So we're going to skip that. Mary, we just have a minute or two left. Do you want to make any last comments, and then I'll see if Jonathan wants to chat about some recommendations? We've talked about this stuff.
I think my primary thing is really sort of reiterating what we've talked about, which is you have to find a way that works for you. And to the extent you use a consultant, find somebody who understands how you work and how you function to make the best arrangement for you, and then figure out the best way, if you have more than you on the team, to work together. And then each piece of what you're doing is just use that. So like there was a template that you blew past. To the extent you're doing documents, is if you don't have a subscription service or you don't have automated documents, just start a process of, like, my policy is if you somehow find the need to pull up another client document, which is actually prohibited in our office, but if you do, because a lot of people still do, is then save that document as a form before you use it, so that you don't have the risk of copying, leaving the wrong things in there or taking the wrong things out. What I see a lot is with a younger lawyer, which I do a lot of training and mentoring, doesn't understand why a particular paragraph might be included in a form. So that template just shows you the way is what you do is you take and start highlighting the things in blue. So my deal is if I'm drafting a particular, all of my trust and will documents are automated, but sometimes there's an ancillary document that I might need to create that I haven't done before. But if it's something we're going to use regularly, then make a form first. And what I always do is say, every time I touch a client file, I also think about how can I automate this for the next time. I don't have 10 hours to stop and automate everything. So I just try and take one step towards automation as I go.
We do exactly what Mary says, with one very significant difference. We highlight all of our instructions in yellow and not in blue. Other than that, we do precisely what Mary said. And I think a lot of you working remotely without your administrative staff for the first time are going to struggle with some of this. And you may very well see the benefits of doing what Mary described in terms of creating forms and templates. If your staff was taking up old client documents, it's dangerous. That should be a no-no and never should be permitted. It should be turned into a form if it's going to be reused. But if you had forms and you're working without the same benefits of administrative personnel that you had before, this can make you very efficient. And when you go back, to whatever extent we go back to the old normal, you should really insist on what Mary just described. We're really out of time. So what I'd like to do, Jonathan, are you still on?
I am, Marty.
You were the guru who in 2010 or 11, I forgot which, had me drink the Kool-Aid of the Office of the Future. And so far, everything you predicted almost a decade ago has come to pass, and I can't thank you enough for it, because it's made me incredibly more efficient. It's made practice incredibly more fun. It's lowered overhead through much smaller office space and so on. So maybe you could just help us wrap up by talking about not only the office of what's become today, but how that can help folks working at home and remotely today.
Well, let me do that by telling you a little story. One of my partners, Fran Musselman, who was the managing partner of Milbank when I became a partner in 1980, got out of Columbia Law School in 1950. He was primarily a litigating lawyer. And in 1957, he went up to IBM in Westchester County and said, you've got these things called IBM punch cards where you put numbers on the cards and then run them through to do certain calculations. I want you to put words on each card, and I want the cards stacked so they make sentences. And the sentences will then make paragraphs, and the paragraphs will make sections. And that way, when I need a new document, rather than having my secretary type it from scratch, and this is in 1957 with manual typewriters, all I have to do is pull out those cards where I want different words and put in new ones. IBM laughed him out of the building and told him never to come back. He went back 10 years later in 1967, and they finally agreed to do it, but they charged Milbank full boat to do it. And he also signed a piece of paper, which he said was one of the biggest mistakes he ever made, that if this kind of document assembly, this word processing ever became anything, IBM would own it and Milbank would own none. In 1986, I had Fran do a presentation at the Association of the Bar of the City of New York about word processing. We had about 500 lawyers attend. And at the end of his presentation, Fran said, and if you don't adopt word processing, this is in 1986, within 5 years, you will no longer be practicing law. There were hoots and hollers, and one lawyer sent me a letter saying, I was so offended by what Mr. Musselman said. My secretary and I will continue to use our IBM Selectric until the cows come home. Well, I guess the cows came home. And what I can tell you, there's an analogy here. If you don't adopt virtually all of this, whether you continue to work remotely or in your office, you're not going to be practicing in 5 years.
That's a bold statement, and something that we've said all along through the process of today's webinar is a lot of these things, if you're not doing them already, take some small steps now. If you've never scanned a document, order a scanner, plug it in, it's plug and play. Just start scanning the things you're working on now to send them back to your office. You will not only see, you will love after the first few times and you get used to it, the efficiency that it provides to you. I'd like to thank Jonathan Blattmacher, Mary Vandernick, and Baron Henley for what I hope was an informative webinar. We tried very hard to give you practical advice that will help you during this difficult, forced upon many work-at-home environment. The email addresses for everyone are on slide 126 if there's questions that we can help with. And I assume that's going to primarily be Baron, but feel free to email Jonathan, Mary, Baron, or I. If you have questions for Interactive or Peak, feel free to email them directly. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe, everybody.